Welcome to the Rimworld Mod Rundown. We'll be taking a quick look at what you can expect to see from integrated implants. For starters, you'll need to own the additional workshop content, Harmony. Today we'll be covering... Hold on.
That's better. Today we'll be going over this absolutely massive amount of additions from integrated implants, which at the time of recording was on version 1.4, the Mind, Body and Tail update. This is definitely one of those mods that's going to have a ton of interactions with other mods, as well as including additional parts depending on what DLC you have installed. So for the sake of this rundown, I'm covering it as if I have all DLC enabled and purely going over what implants will be available with the core mod and dependencies installed. If you find you don't have some of these parts mentioned in the video, or have parts that I haven't mentioned, there could be a few reasons. You might not own all of the DLC, you might have more mods enabled than I do, or very simply, the mod might have been updated again with another batch of fresh implants. There are a few practically essential mods to recommend alongside this right away. First up, you've got Unlimited Reborn. If you're going to be adding in such massive bonuses to your colonists via implants, you want to make sure the game can actually handle those numbers as intended. Otherwise, your 500% manipulation bonus is actually going to be hard capped on most of the stats it could be impacting, with the highest potential offset in some cases being just 150%. Secondly is the Athena framework. Whilst this mod will work without it, you'll be missing about 7 research projects, a couple of implants, and both the chipset and modular part mechanics. And lastly is Vanilla Expanded Framework, as it's required to add in some of the functionality to certain items. So what are we getting? 21 standard research projects, 16 anomaly research projects, unique Archotech implants that cannot be crafted and will only be available as quest rewards, trade goods or complex loot, and multiple other implants spread throughout the standard tech tree. Now, is this a nightmare to cover? Somewhat. Fortunately, LTS separated the implants out pretty well on the mod page itself, so we're going to follow that to some degree. First covering all of the stuff that you can't build yourself, then the implants that fall into the vanilla tech trees, then we'll just go research by research to cover all of the new additions. As to all the questions of can I install X alongside Y that some of you might have about all of these implants, the amount of stacking potential to some of these buffs is just nuts. So whilst I can't definitively say yes or no to all potential combinations, the usual answer is yes, you can, providing the thing that you're installing isn't removing or overriding the slot for the other implant, like how a bionic arm overlaps with a field hand and would stop it from working. First up, we'll cover the Archotech Parts then. For the vast majority of implants with this mod, you're going to need 2 medicine and a medical skill of 5 to install them. They normally have a 100% success rate with a 0% chance of death on failure. And of course your doctor can still shit the bed and screw up royally, but it won't normally be the part that you're trying to install that's at fault.
Damn it! It never gets any easier!
We'll begin with the Archotech Womb. As you would expect, you're going to need a lady for this procedure, as your male colonists will not appreciate trying to push a watermelon out of their penis. This will double fertility rate and pregnancy speed progress, as well as ensuring that children are always born healthy. Not only that, you are able to toggle birth control with a simple click of a button on the colonist bar, like closing a tiny trapdoor to block any unwanted visitors. On top of all of this, any children born from an Archotech womb will receive the Archo-born health effect, boosting their psychic sensitivity by 100%, meditation gain rate by 50%, neural heat recovery by a massive 0.5, and giving them a 200% lifespan. Not that I have ever played a colony long enough to have a child born and reach old age naturally anyway. The Psychic Shield is pretty straightforward, providing a small but rapidly recharging shield belt effect to the colonist, with the major caveat being that this blocks ranged and melee attacks. The maximum health of this shield is increased with psychic sensitivity, sitting at a default value of 40. It also won't stop ranged attacks from being fired outwards, so you can safely install this on your backline fighters without removing their ability to contribute in a raid. The Psychic Levitator removes all risk of springing traps and allows the user to ignore any movement speed penalties applied by the terrain, so you can skip over rivers and lakes, giving enemies the old loop-de-loop. It also provides a bonus to movement speed that scales with psychic sensitivity, starting at 0.2 and increasing proportionally with any bonus sensitivity. The Psychic Nullifier is really simple, adding a toggle to the colonist bar to either allow or block any psychic effects. Extremely useful if you're throwing hundreds of extra percentages into a pawn's psychic sensitivity and then have a psychic drone event land on your tile. No more run wild or give up events causing your strongest caster to just up and leave. And finally, for these Archotech implants, you have the voice box. This adds about what you'd expect. 25% trade price improvement, a 50% bonus to social impact, arrest chance, negotiation ability, suppression power, and conversion power, making for an absolute god tier moral guide. As with all health conditions, these bonuses are applied before any skill modifiers and the relevant health stats, so it's going to have a far greater impact on your conversion power than it will on your trade prices, as trade prices are always nerfed by the social stat multiplier by default. So that's all of your Archotech bits. Let's go through the standard tech tree and see what's been added. Now, whilst there are parts unlocked in things like gunsmithing and blowback operation, you're going to need the Modular Bionic weaponry research to make use of it, so I'll cover parts like that with the paired research later on. With standard Mechtech, you'll unlock the standard signal booster chip. These are made at a machining table, costing 1 signal chip and 4 components, and they work very similarly to things like the control sublink, being a plug and play bit of tech that doesn't require surgery to install, and allowing up to 3 of the standard chips to be thrown in at once. Each level of this signal booster chip will increase not only bandwidth, but also control radius, allowing your mechs to venture further away from the Mechanator. Just like the control sublink from base game, you're going to need to get this signal booster to level 3 to make use of the next tier, Signal Booster High, which is unlocked from High Mechtech, costing 1 power focus chip, 3 components and 3 advanced components per chip. This works exactly the same, adding 3 more levels of extra bandwidth and control radius. At Ultra Mechtech, you unlock the Ultra Booster, and you know how this works by now. It requires 1 nanostructuring chip and 6 advanced components to build. This can push your signal booster buff all the way to level 9, giving a final bonus of 27 to bandwidth and range. Just like other Mechanator chips, these can be installed alongside other buffs too, so you're going to be able to stack these with things like the control sublink and field an entire mech army. Now, we did hop over a few other parts in the High Mechtech there, so let's go back to the Mech Hive Satellite uplink, costing 1 power focus chip, 3 components and 3 advanced components. This will allow you to call in a hostile mech cluster on demand. It can either act as a defensive measure for your own colony, or you could use it to potentially farm the mood buff and some scrap if you're really that ballsy. As standard, this ability has a 60-day cooldown period and will knock the Mechanator into a 24-hour coma upon its use. The uplink itself can be installed up to 3 times, with the second lowering the cooldown by 25% and the third halving it. Also from High Mechtech, we've got the Mech Womb. This grants the Mechanator an ability similar to the War Queen, again costing 1 power focus chip, 3 standard and 3 advanced components. This can stack 6 times, with each extra chip granting an additional 2 charges to the grubs that you can spawn. These grubs are pretty flimsy, doing minimal damage at best. They are, however, friggin' tiny, with a melee dodge bonus that makes them an absolute pain in the arse to hit in combat. Perfect for swarming ranged enemies and locking them into a melee fight, so they can't pull the trigger against a more high value target. They will only last about 7 hours once spawned though, so you can't keep them hovering around the colony all the time. You're also going to need to reload your Mechanator after using this ability, with each press of the button spawning 2 grubs and each grub costing 10 steel to build. So cost wise, you need to be a little bit careful about spamming this, but fortunately once the battery dies on the grubs, you can shred their corpses to get a pretty nice chunk of steel back. Next from Ultra Mechtech, we have the Remote Dominator. This will let you take control of any mech below the Ultra Heavyweight class, as long as the Mechanator has the bandwidth to support it. So whilst you can't yoink a Diabolus or a War Queen, you can easily grab yourself some free centipedes with this. Given that the part costs 1 nanostructuring chip and 5 advanced components, you might be able to pull back the cost of creating it relatively quickly. What you'll need to be careful about is the range limitation on this ability, as with a single one installed it can only reach 8 tiles, and it still takes 4 seconds to complete the process. You can extend the range of this by adding in 2 more chips, with level 2 reaching up to 14 tiles and level 3 stretching all the way to 20. Then you'll just need to sit tight for the 5-day cooldown before you can use this again. So hopefully you're grabbing yourself a free mech every time this is off cooldown to try and recoup some of the cost of building it in the first place. Then you've got the Remote Resurrector, costing the same as the Dominator and working with the same range increase mechanic based on how many times it's been installed. This instead allows you to quickly bring back a friendly mech with a simple 4-second cast. Its cooldown is, again, 5 days, but this can save you the lengthy and costly repair procedures to bring back some of your biggest mechs if they happen to get a little bit battered in combat. Whilst it won't always bring them back in perfect condition, they're certainly going to be a lot better than they were before using this.
Hey, didn't you died?
Finally, from Mechtech there is the Warp Programmer Interface. This costs just a little bit more than the other parts, at 1 nanostructuring chip and 6 advanced components. It'll boost the combat capabilities of all controlled mechs, with each one granting +1 shooting accuracy, -10% aiming time, +1 melee hit chance and +1 melee dodge chance, stacking up to 3 times. Whilst that might not initially sound like crazy numbers, the Mechanator's stats also provide an impact to this effect too, scaling with intellectual, melee and shooting skills. Now, with how this scaling works on a percentage offset, you will find that highly skilled Mechanators can bring down aiming time on their ranged mechs to below 10% with 3 of these chips installed, or add a 44% dodge chance to an army of Scythers. These are brutal. Okay, moving away from Mechanators. With standard bionic replacement research, you're going to unlock the Bionic Womb. This may not be as impactful as the Archotech version, but it does grant a 150% effective fertility and gestation speed, with a bonus 10% offset to birth quality for the cost of just 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components. So whilst you won't be getting the magic Archo baby buff, or a guaranteed healthy birth, this will help push quality into that high 80 or 90% consistently. With the neural computation research, you'll unlock the Hacking Port. Finally, an implant that helps with hacking speed. This will double the hacking speed of the colonist it's installed in and costs just 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components. Think of all the vaults that you could be raiding with this. From healing factors, you'll get Synth Marrow, costing, can you guess? 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components. This implant enhances blood regeneration factor by 100%, helping in a few different ways. You'll have a more reliable food source for any sanguophages with this installed on someone, but it'll also allow them to fight for longer after sustaining a large cut, as it'll help to offset that blood loss speed. Not only that, if they do eventually collapse from blood loss, they'll be able to pull themselves out of the danger zone much faster when they're patched up. No more risky consciousness debuffs hovering around while someone's in hospital. With flesh shaping, you get the Strength Enhancer, a little cheaper than the previous parts, 15 plasteel and 3 advanced components. And this thing might actually give you a reason to look for the flesh shaping tech print, as the implant provides a 25 carry capacity bonus and a 125% melee damage buff. This will stack with genes on Xenos like Neanderthals that already have strong melee damage, resulting in 188% melee damage, making even simple weapons capable of absolutely obliterating torsos with ease. To make any real use of this carry capacity buff, you're going to need something like pick up and haul, so that colonists will put multiple items in their pockets when hauling, or ogre stack, so they can lift simply massive quantities of a single item in one go. From molecular analysis, you've got a couple of parts. The Biotuner is up first, costing 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components. This boosts biosculpting speed to 200%, making the procedures actually somewhat viable when compared to modded content, as the main issue with biosculpting is that so many other mods now do what it does, but better, faster or cheaper. On a colony using the transhumanist meme, these are going to be invaluable to keep your pawns actually working instead of spending half of their life in the goop tank. The other part from this tech is the Gourmand Tongue. A little cheaper at just 15 plasteel and 3 advanced components, this adds an extra +3 mood buff on top of any that may already be granted by the quality of the meal, lasting for 24 hours. There's no additional bonuses, or debuffs however, for having this part installed and getting some loving. So those are all the additions to the standard tech tree. We're going to move into the normal implant research projects that have been added by the mod. These next projects are going to require machining and prosthetics to study. First up, you've got basic mechanical implants. The internal climate control costs 80 steel and 6 components, and provides a nice simple 20 degrees of tolerance for cold and hot temperatures, Ideal if you're running a nudist colony and don't want to get frostbite on any of your pokey bits. Also with this tech you've got skeletal bracing, costing 100 steel and 8 components. Quite an expensive craft for what it does, providing an additional 25 to carry capacity, but I guess it does offer the potential to bring back more loot from World Quest sites, so it'd pay for itself pretty quickly. Next is the basic hormonal implants. From this you get the Crypto Sleep adapter, costing just 40 steel and 6 components to build, which provides complete immunity from Crypto Sleep sickness. How often you're actually going to make real use of this is probably debatable, but it is there. You also unlock the Lacto Simulator implant with this, costing 40 steel and 4 components. This gives you a button to toggle whether or not the colonist is producing milk, and it works on both men and women. Yep. Useful if you want to share parenting responsibilities around the colony, as you can have people producing milk on demand. You'll also get the research for implanted explosives with these prerequisites, allowing you to put the desired shell directly inside a colonist's body. This operation is also going to require a couple of components to rig up the detonation solution too. Now, not all bombs are actually dangerous to use in this way. An EMP or fire foam can be safely detonated inside a colonist's body without it causing them any harm, but an anti-grain shell? Maybe not. This does make for the perfect drop pod surprise though, if you happen to have a real grudge against one of your own colonists and want them to go out in the most spectacular way possible. A colonist that dies with one of these bombs implanted will not cause it to trigger. You need to hit that button to make it work. There's no dead man switch installed here. You can still hit that button when they're downed however, so if you want all of your colonists to have one of these installed as a last resort method to stop them from being captured, it does have that potential. Okay, now we're moving up to research that requires microelectronics and prosthetics, starting with remote activation. Now these unlocks are a little bit more severe. First off we've got the voice lock, costing 30 steel and 3 components. This gives you a button when the colonist is selected to remove their ability to talk, with a button still being available when they're experiencing a mental break. So if you happen to have a colonist that is prone to insulting sprees, this might be a solution for that problem. Also useful if you've got a colonist from another ideology that keeps getting on everybody's nerves by trying to preach to them. Next is the brain shocker. Again, 30 steel, 3 components. This is a little bit more severe in its approach, allowing you to render the colonist unconscious at the press of a button, immediately stopping whatever mental break they're experiencing. This won't trigger catharsis, so they're still going to be miserable, and having this part installed gives them a constant -8 mood debuff. It does provide a small bonus to slave suppression though, if you'd rather go the route of implants instead of collars and bondage gear. Finally is the brain detonator, costing exactly the same but with a much more final approach to its effect, giving a constant -20 mood debuff while installed for the upside of 45% suppression power. This will let you quickly and permanently put down any uprisings if you keep these installed on your slaves, turning their heads into a fine mist with a single click. If you happen to capture any raiders, and they're unwaveringly loyal say, you can install this on them and then set them free, as they'll have a chance of turning back up in future raids with this still installed. It makes for a pretty hilarious opening when their members walk back into range of your detonator and just shower their friends with bits of their own skull. With gun turrets unlocked, you will also be able to research implanted turrets. To start with, this will give you the shoulder turret, a simple mini turret that's attached to the colonist, able to fire whilst moving with very limited damage, low burst, short range and pretty poor accuracy. It fires entirely independently from the pawn however, allowing for an additional layer of suppression when installed across your firing line. For only 60 steel and 8 components, it also never needs reloading, and can be toggled off if friendly fire is a concern. Nice to have around to cover your retreat, potentially staggering an attacker or two as you scarper. These shoulder turrets are unique, so if you want to make use of another one, you're first going to need to uninstall whichever one was on the colonist to begin with. So now that we've got a free shoulder again, let's add in the shoulder mortar. This is unlocked with the mortars research, costing 30 plasteel and 5 advanced components, and it's surprisingly short range, working more like a grenade launcher than a mortar. This works as an active ability rather than a passive turret like the previous one, storing just a single charge and costing 30 steel to refuel. The shell that it fires explodes in a 5x5 radius with a standard HE damage, so you're getting around 50 shred that can splash across multiple body parts and hit multiple targets. Very useful for a blob of enemies that are breaking their way through your choke point, and you need something with a little bit of punch to keep them back. Just be careful as it has a somewhat lengthy wind-up time. Now let's do rockets instead, with the shoulder rocket pod unlocked from the Rocket Swarm launcher. This costs 30 plasteel and 5 advanced components. It comes with the upside of having more range than the mortar, 2 shots rather than 1, and it takes chem fuel to restock rather than steel, which I would argue is better. On the downside, it has a smaller explosion radius of just 3x3, but that might not actually be a downside all things considered. It allows you to thread the needle and hopefully destroy less of your own fortifications when used in a tricky situation. And finally, from this tech, with pulse charge munitions, you will get the shoulder charge turret. Costing just 25 plasteel and 4 advanced components, this works identically to the normal shoulder turret, with the upside being it deals more damage, has higher armor penetration, and much better accuracy. This is easily one of the most affordable combat buffs to help keep your kill box from overflowing, providing a great deal of additional chip damage to your firing line that will even continue to work as you fall back between any positions. Just be a little bit careful with the friendly fire, as the rounds from this turret now have the potential to absolutely brain someone if a shot happens to go in the wrong direction. Time to take a big jump in tech. All projects from here are going to need fabrication and bionic replacements to start researching. Up first are bionic tails, with these enhancements having some cool visuals to accompany them too. The first tail is simply named Bionic Tail, costing 30 plasteel and 5 advanced components. This buffs melee dodge by 120% after the calculation from melee skill, movement and sight. It also provides a movement and manipulation bonus of 10%. Sadly, these tails don't stack, so you can't make yourself a Bionic 9 tails that's dodging punches before they've even been thrown. You also get the Claw Tail for the same cost. This is much more suited for manual labour than for combat, with it granting a 25 carry capacity bonus and a 25% manipulation boost, greatly helping with any construction or large scale crafting projects. And then if you've also got poison synthesis unlocked in the main research tree, you'll get the Venom Tail. Again, 30 plasteel, 5 advanced components. This provides an extra melee attack option that inflicts a simply massive 26% toxic buildup per strike, boasting pretty decent armor penetration and 22 damage on a 2.6 second cooldown. It can even be boosted by melee damage buffs like the Strength Enhancer. Next is the research for cranial insulation. This will be near essential on any colonist that you are stacking implants on, as for only 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components, you can completely negate EMP damage on installed brain modules, like a neuro calculator. This is going to stop a single EMP misfire from potentially taking down your entire melee line if you're making liberal use of implants. This doesn't, however, provide any protection from EMP damage to things like shield belts. There's no cheese here, I'm afraid. Now we've got LTEX augmentation. These parts are going to have an additional LTEX cost associated with them if you're using vanilla Psycasts expanded. LTEX adornments cost 10 plasteel, 4 advanced components and 100 gold, adding a gold crest to the colonist's head that is considered high fashion. This implant also boosts psychic sensitivity by 20% and adds a 0.03 neural heat recovery rate bonus. Whilst this can't be stacked, there is a lot of options in the game now to boost your psycasting prowess. You're just going to need to take a little bit from everywhere to make a godlike caster. The other implant is the Neural Heat Sink, costing 20 plasteel, 6 advanced components and 20 gold. This lowers neural heat gain to 75%, allowing certain abilities that are channeled to go for even longer, or for psycasting trees that focus on heat accumulation as their balancing mechanic to become very quickly unbalanced. I'm sure this is going to cause some odd interactions with certain mods out there though, as certain casts scale with the amount of heat generated by abilities, so you could end up inadvertently nerfing certain skills here. Biomimicry is extremely specific in its utility, unlocking the Biochameleon device. Costing 10 plasteel and 5 advanced components, this will allow the user to bypass any bio-coded gear requirements, and if you're using the Deserters faction, it allows you to unlock crates that require a noble's bio signature. I don't see too much use for the bio-coded part of this, but those crates? Oh man, sign me up for that. I am always forgetting to bring the right people along when raiding and have to leave a bunch of loot at those sites. Then we've got Neural Hyperacceleration, getting you the Vanguard Accelerator. This is a bit more pricey, at 30 plasteel and 6 advanced components. This effect is ridiculously powerful though, but kind of a pain in the arse to use. It lasts for 3 seconds with a 6-second cooldown, so to make meaningful use of it you're going to end up needing to constantly turn it back on. This is balanced out with the Vanguard Psychosis debuff, with each activation of the Accelerator, applying around a 19% build-up. The higher the build-up, the worse effect it's going to have on the colonist's mental break threshold, with extreme build-up causing an immediate berserk state. The buff itself has a 500% increase to movement speed, a 500% increase to melee dodge, 500% global work speed, immunity to stagger, and a reduction to aiming time, ranged cooldown, and melee cooldown that sets them at just 20%, resulting in lightning fast attacks. It's pretty obvious why this ability is a nightmare to balance the numbers around its duration and cooldown though, as a single minute in the hands of the right soldier and they could wipe an entire raid. 3 seconds feels just a little bit too tight though, like it's hard to squeeze any real value out of the buff in those very short windows.
No thanks, chum. I know how to fly just fine.
Onto something a little more simple, bionic faceplates. This will unlock the implant of the same name, costing 30 plasteel and 6 advanced components. For this you're getting perfect night vision, 80% toxic environment resistance, 50% additional sight, and a negative hit to beauty of -1, given the somewhat terrifying visage you've strapped to the poor bastard's face. That 80% resistance is the magic number that you're looking for with things like biological warfare 2, making this ideal to protect a colonist from war crimes and grant them a huge bonus to range combat at night. It's cheaper than a pair of detoxifier lungs too. Okay, before we move on to anything that's more new mechanics based, let's wrap up the other bits of tech here. If you're using biotech, you've got 5 unique implants for sanguophages. Surprisingly, this doesn't need the death rest research to unlock. All of these implants cost 15 plasteel, 50 gold, 4 advanced components, and 5 standard hemogen packs. First up is the Death Rest apparatus. This is a pretty straightforward buff to death rest effectiveness, upping it to 120%. And whilst these implants do require the colonist to possess the death rest gene, they aren't taking up any death rest capacity slots, so they're an extremely efficient way to quickly boost up a fresh sanguophage that hasn't had an opportunity to stab themselves with multiple capacity injections yet. Next is the death rest capacitor, slowing the decline of the death rest bar by 20%. This is great if you're using alongside sanguophages expanded, as it makes those buffs that require hemogen packs to fuel them a lot more efficient in terms of their cost versus duration. Hemo fangs make for very easy refueling in combat, provided that they're actually in the pool of preferred attacks. Any attacks against a human enemy made with these teeth will restore 10 hemogen, regardless of if it was mitigated by armour or not, allowing you to make more liberal use of abilities like piercing spine or long jump. The Hemogenic Activator is another implant that's useful if you frequently burn through abilities on your sanguophage, or for some of the expanded races that breeze through their hemogen pool naturally. It increases the hemogen gain from sources by 50%, allowing you to get more value from every feed or blood bag. And finally there's the Hemogenic Microcompressor, that's going to boost the max hemogen by 50%. Useful if you use a lot of abilities back to back without a way to restore your pool in between, though it's probably one of the less valuable implants included with this research. So one last normal tech to cover before we get a little bit funky: subdermal armour. This requires recon armour to have been researched to become available and will unlock the subdermal armour implant, and a prestige version too. Again, the prestige implant will have an additional LTEX cost if you're using Psycast Expanded. Now these are expensive implants, with the standard version costing 50 plasteel, 6 advanced components, 50 hyperweave and 10 uranium, and the prestige requiring an additional 30 plasteel and 30 more hyperweave too. They both provide 30 blunt, 20 heat and 80% sharp armor to the entire body, including things like eyes. The cost is understandable given that the strongest vanilla implant, the Stone Skin Gland, provides less sharp armor and comes with a debuff to beauty and movement. The Prestige version will also give the colonist a bonus 10% psychic sensitivity and a 0.07 heat recovery offset. Implants like this can be vital to stack armor on the difficult body parts, like fingers, toes, eyes, ears, all of those parts that normally only have a single layer offering them any protection. Alright, let's cover a new easy mechanic first then. Skill chips. This research will unlock the chip port implant and the ability to create a standard chip for all 12 skills. The chip port itself is installed into the brain and can support one chip for each skill, so you aren't locked to only one area of expertise. Standard chips all provide a +4 bonus to the related skill, similar to a strong gene effect. It also applies the bonus after the natural skill level, meaning a colonist with a strong melee gene and a melee chip will have a bonus of +8, but they'll be working towards the required experience of their natural level. It also means that a baseliner colonist with every standard chip installed would not suffer any experience loss until level 14. Standard chips aren't all you can get though. You'll have opportunities through quests, trades, and loot to find ultra skill chips. These provide a +8 bonus instead, but no passion, so they are a little bit different from a great gene. You can freely pop skill chips back out of a colonist brain by using the gizmo on the toolbar, meaning you can easily juggle these chips between people as needed. The port itself costs 15 plasteel and 4 advanced components, with each standard chip costing an additional 6 advanced components, so you're unlikely to put a full set of 12 on each colonist, unless you've got 72 advanced components to burn for every person in your colony.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
Now onto the next mechanic and its associated research tree, Modular Bionics. This allows you to install parts on top of bionic or Archotech limbs, working in a similar fashion to installing a Mechanator chip. You just plug and play. Simply right click on the desired module with a colonist that has the required bionic parts and apply it. These parts aren't exclusive either. Multiple enhancements can be added to individual bionics or Archotech limbs, with some exceptions that we'll cover in a bit. Now let's say you've got a colonist that has bionics quite literally up to their eyeballs, and everything is splattered with these modules too. But now you've found an Archotech limb and you want to use that instead. Fear not, taking off the bionic part that has all of these enhancements breaks it back down to the limb and individual modules. So now you can reinstall that Archotech limb and throw all of the enhancements back on top of it. Makes sense? Good. Let's cover these modules then. First up, from Modular Bionics, you have arm, lens, and leg plating. All of these modules included with this system cost 6 advanced components to make. Not just from this research, literally all of them. So you're going to get more mileage out of certain parts. Maybe prioritize what you're building a little bit at the start, as getting someone a whole new arm is far more preferable than slapping plating on an existing colonist's limbs. Anyway, these extra plates provide 20 heat, 20 blunt, and 50 additional sharp armor. Pretty handy as a baseline upgrade, as it reduces the chance of having your bionics smashed to crap in combat, which is even more punishing when you're stacking a lot of these modules onto the part as well. If you're going to make this much of an investment onto limbs, you want to make damn sure they're as sturdy as possible first. From there we have modular eye augmentation, unlocking you 4 more modules to let you go all JC Denton. You have the eye colour module, which enhances social impact by 5%, the telescopic sight module, which increases long range accuracy by 25% and also increases range to 120%, there's the targeting module, granting an accuracy bonus of +1 and reducing aiming time to 80%. Finally, there's a night vision module, granting you 50% night vision. Now, clearly you're expected to use these enhancements in pairs where possible, given that you've got 2 eyes. It'll make the scaling of some of these things a little bit interesting though, resulting in a range of 144% because of the stacking effect. And whilst this stacking effect will benefit the range, it screws you a little bit on things like aiming time, which instead drops to 64% because 80% of 80. Not like it's the end of the world though. with the majority of these modules working best for ranged combat and making for absolutely lethal snipers, given how percentile bonuses like this favour weapons that already have large values to begin with, such as the rifle's range and aiming time, which will see the best bonuses, and it already operates at a naturally high accuracy over the longest distances. From heads, let's move to shoulders and do arm augmentations. You've got the Death Grip module, which will stop your colonists dropping their weapon upon being downed. It's not exactly a mind-blowing enhancement, but if your enemies are using explosives, it might stop a very expensive or rare weapon from being blown to shit, provided the pawn survives the salvo. Then we've got the Recoil Suppression module, lowering ranged cooldown to 80%. Similar to how the aiming time buffs stack with the eye modules, if you have one of these in each arm, you end up with a 64% ranged cooldown modifier. And as I've discussed in a few previous rundown videos, some of the biggest buffs to ranged combat in the game come from lowering this ranged cooldown. It's why there are so few buffs in base game for it. It's incredibly powerful and quickly grows out of control. Finally, you've got the Vibro module that increases melee armor penetration by 10%, turning every weapon into a vibro knife. Unfortunately, colonists won't see any relationship bonuses towards their spouse for installing this. On to toes then. Firstly, you've got the Digitigrade Leg module, granting an extra 13% movement speed at the cost of 150% terrain difficulty factor, which gets even more severe if you put one of these on each leg. If you're going to go this route, ideally pair it with the Psychic Levitator to completely nullify the downside, but failing that, you're going to want to make sure that the colonist is almost always moving on a floored surface. They'll practically slow to a crawl on awkward surfaces like mud or rubble. Next is the Leap module. The leap is cast near instantaneously, which is ideal as it will give some nice iframes whilst floating. What isn't quite so ideal is the 6-hour cooldown that comes with it and the relatively short range compared to other leap abilities. If you install this on both legs, the abilities are separate, so you can use one to get into combat and save the other to get back out if needed. Super handy. Finally, that leaves the Sprint module. With this installed, you get an ability to boost movement speed to 200% for 2 hours on a 6-hour cooldown. Again, if you install this on both legs, you have 2 buttons for the ability, both on their own cooldown. If you use them both at the same time, there is no additional effect. You aren't getting 200% on top of 200%, nor are you extending the duration. It just reapplies the buff and potentially wastes the remaining duration of the previous buff, so make sure you're chaining them rather than wasting them together. Next is the Modular Bionic weaponry, with these parts being exclusive to certain areas. You're going to have some parts that apply to the arm and others that apply to the shoulder, so working out a viable combo before investing a bunch of expensive components and realising it doesn't work that way is pretty important. First up from this research is the arm blade. As you'd expect, this does indeed install in the arm slot. This gives you a pretty meh sharp attack that's weak enough that a colonist with this installed might still favour using their Bionic or Archotech arm instead, just beating the target to death. The Bionic claws, on the other hand, are enough of an upgrade that you'll see them more frequently used, which is strange. They cost exactly the same as the arm blades, boast the same attack speed, but have a higher DPS and better armour penetration. It's a straight upgrade for something unlocked at the same tier with an identical cost, and both of these modules take the arm slot, so claws it is, I guess. Now you have some ranged weapon options, which are all installed in the shoulder slot. All of these guns have a 2-hour cooldown on their use and only require time to refuel, no rearming with steel or chem fuel. The Incinerator gives you a short range flame belch similar to the Hellcat rifle, dealing pretty low damage but potentially setting targets ablaze and allowing you to get more shots off against them, especially useful against certain anomaly threats too. Next you have the shotgun. This deals more damage than a standard pump shotty and fires in a burst of 2. Absolutely lethal in close quarters, and it's really quick to pull this out with its accuracy being extremely high. It's great for catching runners or interrupting raiders that are preparing to use something quite nasty against you. Finally, there's the SMG, which has a higher burst than any SMG in the game that I know about, spitting out enough bullets to make your average LMG blush, albeit with less damage. Again, highly accurate over a short distance. This is great to splatter an enemy with a lot of minor wounds in the hopes of knocking them down rather than outright killing them, and it's not quite as likely to take off any arms or legs like the shotgun is. Just like the cooldowns for jumping or sprinting, you can have a weapon on each arm and use their cooldowns independently, potentially having a flamethrower ready for things like bugs and anomaly threats, and a shotgun ready for any drop pod raiders. Or you can go full Dakar and use 2 SMGs. Finally with this tree is the modular Archotech Bionic weaponry, which will require a tech print from the Empire to unlock, so best of luck finding it. This unlocks you 3 weapons that take up the arm slot, all of them performing better than the standard arm blades and claws. Firstly is the mono wire whip. This absolutely cranks up the armor penetration, hitting 72%. Whilst the bionic claw potentially does hit harder, the mono wire hits a lot faster, so its lower damage per hit is more likely to get through whatever protection the target is wearing, and if it doesn't, you get to try again very quickly. The plasma claw is an odd one, only 22% penetration, less damage than the bionic claw, and a chance of burning the target on hit. The main issue here is how easy it is for high-tech factions to stack sharp and heat armor. So with its limited penetration and the upside being the immolation chance, this quickly loses any advantage against people above industrial tech. Lastly, you've got the Zeus knuckles. Now these are what I'm talking about. Pretty low penetration, admittedly, but it's striking against blunt armor, so it's going to be working against a lower armor value as standard. They offer solid damage and have the huge upside of applying the EMP effect when striking mechs or a raider wearing a shield belt. These make for great, quote-unquote, unarmed options, allowing you to absolutely pummel the ever-loving crap out of enemies. Shall we do the mechanic you all likely want to know about then? Ranni the Witchification, the research for extra limbs. This will allow you to install an extra pair of arms with either bionic or Archotech limbs. You can't have extra legs, despite all the bragging that you attempted to do in college about having a third, and these surgeries will not work with simple prosthetics. These arms work differently to a normally implanted arm too. You won't be able to apply extra modules to them, so you can't stack 4 recoil suppression buffs, I'm afraid. When first installed, these extra limbs are going to be a pain in the arse to use, getting in the way rather than actually helping. It isn't a quick process to get used to them either. It takes a year to adapt to having this new limb. It will go through 4 stages of development, starting at unwieldy, which lowers manipulation by 20% and increases melee cooldown by 115%. This means you're likely going to want to bite the bullet and put both extra arms on at the same time, so you can get over this gross debuff period as quickly as possible, rather than learning with one arm and then having to do it all again with a second, essentially offsetting the buff that you're going to be getting from the first. At around the day 20 mark of having these installed, the arms are going to become inconvenient, which is only a 5% penalty to manipulation and a 105% melee cooldown. It's barely a debuff at this point, so you've got past the worst of it. The next change will occur around 40 days, turning to acclimatized. Now you're really seeing some positives, 10% additional manipulation and 95% melee cooldown. Finally, after 1 whole year with these extra appendages, the colonist has mastered them, with a massive 25% bonus to manipulation and 85% melee cooldown. Whilst one of these buffs might appear wasted on a ranged combatant, a manipulation bonus of that strength has some pretty phenomenal impact on ranged accuracy, so I wouldn't say these should be prioritised on melee necessarily. If anything, I value these things most highly on crafters, as they will, eventually anyway, provide a global work speed of 150%, not counting any standard limbs that have been replaced or any other implants either. High global work speed on a solid crafter means you're able to churn out more implants, eventually turning your entire colony into a tangled web of replacement limbs and cybernetic goodness. The only part of this that's a bit of a letdown is the lack of any visual for these extra arms. I was hoping they'd work similar to the tentacle arms, with a couple of Adam Jensen specials protruding from the colonist's shoulder blades. Whew, now we've got the final section to go over, the Anomaly editions. The majority of these are advanced projects, so you'll likely be quite deep in your Eldritch study before getting to make use of this stuff, but it does greatly expand upon mechanics introduced with the DLC. It's probably the first mod that I've seen so far to really do Anomaly any justice. Let's start with the basic projects first, and cover everything that has bioferrite shaping as its prerequisite. That lands us on hulkification surgery. Surprisingly, this doesn't actually do anything to increase the colonist's body size. Costing 120 bioferrite and a couple of medicine, this procedure will apply the hulkification effect, lowering beauty by 2 and move speed by 0.8, whilst adding 50 carry capacity and buffing melee damage by 150%. Now, those of you who are paying attention just went, oh shit, because you realise this can be performed on a xenotype like a Neanderthal, and you can install a strength enhancer. That's 281% melee damage. Who needs to be beautiful when you can clobber people so hard that there isn't even a puddle left to send back to their widow? Emacification surgery kinda does the opposite. Also costing 120 bioferrite and 2 meds, this has the same -2 hit on beauty, but instead it buffs move speed by 1.2 and halves melee cooldown, at the cost of increasing incoming damage to 125%. For context, delicate colonists are hit for 115, so this is a really grim debuff. All kinds of crappy attacks now have the potential to completely maim the colonist with this procedure, with the answer to that problem being, yes, if they can catch them. Now I do get that line of logic, it's fine, until they get into a social fight and break their own hand against someone else's jaw. Not only that, it doesn't matter how fast you are in Rimworld, I've yet to see someone outrun a bullet. The nullification lobotomy is a pretty drastic measure to take, costing the usual 120 bioferrite and 2 meds, but needing a medical skill of 8 to perform. This also has a catastrophic 50% chance of death on failure, so consider very carefully if it's actually worth it. Once completed, this lobotomy will make the target completely immune to psychic effects, just like the trait Psychically Deaf. Given how over the years the game has progressed, this trait has turned from being a positive thing into a negative in many cases. I'm honestly not sure why you would need to take this risky, expensive and permanent measure on one of your own colonists, but there's always a why for doing things in Rimworld, so I'm sure to someone this procedure makes perfect sense. Now we're up to advanced tech, and the last part of this surgical quad is the Sanguophage lobotomy. This thing has a 90% chance of death on failure, but meh, fuck it, it's not your life, right? It costs 180 bioferrite and 2 meds to perform, so it's more expensive to do than the other procedures too. Not only that, it needs 12 medical skill as well. This is certainly a more advanced surgery, so you would expect it to have amazing results, surely. Well, no. The upside to this surgery is that it limits the range of emotions a colonist can experience. Their base mood is always set to 50, and all positive and negative mood effects only hit 25% as hard as they would on a normal colonist. But this procedure hits their capacity to learn, reducing global learning factor to just 10%, as well as dropping certainty loss down to 10% as well. So overall, it might be good on slaves that work jobs that are unskilled, like cleaning or hauling, but man, this thing is just a brutal and utterly ruinous thing to do on most colonists. Well, it also adds a -3 mood debuff too, if that matters when the colonist doesn't feel anything anymore.
You have a fun weekend? There was a small fire in my home. I lost many photo albums of treasured memories. I'm devastated.
Sticking with bioferrite as a prerequisite, we'll clear out all of these techs first. So next is the hyperalkaleic Archites, which unlocks the alkali coat implant. Made at the bioferrite shaper, which is going to be the case for most of these parts, it costs 10 bioferrite, 40 twisted meat and 1 shard. This makes the colonist completely immune to acid damage. Now I say that with a massive disclaimer. I'm sure there's mods out there that have added in acid damage that might get around this protection, as they're looking for a different value when applying their debuff or damage. But this acid protection specifically protects you from being digested by a devourer, essentially giving you a sacrificial lamb to throw at the big beastie and let them chew on them, whilst you put them down with a little percussive maintenance to their skull. Then we've got the hyperadrenaline research, which gets you the gland of the same name, costing 10 bioferrite, 40 twisted meat and 1 shard. I wonder if this cost is going to become a trend. This gland will sit with 0 impact until the colonist it's installed in is wounded. Then it springs to life and grants the rage speed buff. It lowers pain and stagger time to 0%, whilst buffing move speed to 175%. It makes for both a fantastic engagement and retreat tool. For ranged fighters, it allows you to easily slink away when you get caught in melee, so no more being stun locked and unable to move, but for melee fighters, you're able to rapidly close the distance and attack people using guns. A single bullet will turn you into the Juggernaut that can barge forward and slap them in the face for such an injustice. A really beneficial implant to have on basically everyone, as even non-combatants will find this useful so they can get the hell out of dodge if bullets start flying. Next is the Retributive Impaler, costing 20 Bioferrite, 30 Twisted Meat and 1 Shard. Hey, the cost wasn't a trend after all. This gives the colonist a Thorns effect when damaged in combat, returning a small cut to the attacker. Now, the best part of this is that even deflected attacks will still return damage to the attacker, so you aren't necessarily having to get the absolute piss kicked out of you to make use of this. Someone clad head to toe in the strongest armour will still see its benefit, so it becomes a pretty easy inclusion to throw on your melee line to help them get some extra chip damage in. Now comes something really cool, the Slayer's Collar. Costing just 50 Bioferrite and 1 Shard, this implant is going to want to go on your biggest, baddest and most brutal murder machine, or you're going to need to pull some pretty shady shenanigans with beggars and charity quests. The collar will progress when the colonist stacks killing blows, advancing through Onyx, Dull, Ruby, Crimson, Sanguine and finally Radiant. Upon reaching 50 killing blows, they will earn a charge of Death Refusal. Now, these kills need to be humanoids and they need to be final blows. It's easiest to have colonists with this work as a cleaner, wandering the corridors after an engagement with the finish off command from Allow tool, racking up cheap and easy kills by stabbing whoever's left in the face. Then you have the Psychic Sustainer, back to the 10 Bioferrite, 40 meat and 1 Shard formula. This implant will only be of real use on casters that frequently empty their entire focus bar, as it greatly slows the rate of the need bar's decay whilst the colonist is meditating, allowing them to meditate without interruption for an entire day if needed. I could try and say something clever here, that if times are really tough this will help you stretch food stockpiles, but let's be real, if you've made it far enough to unlock and build this kind of tech, you aren't going to be struggling for food.
We're practically starving here.
Starving? You.
Finally, with Bioferrite shaping, you'll have access to the Psychic Beguiler study, costing 10 Bioferrite, 2 Shards and the Golden Cube. Wait, the cube? This implant improves beauty by 1 as a baseline, but it can be enhanced further with a high psychic sensitivity. Not only that, it gives a unique active ability with a 30-day cooldown, called Psychic Beguile. This allows you to make the target become utterly obsessed with the caster, with them instantly joining your faction, but not converting to your ideology, and gaining a massive social impact bonus towards the caster too. This is obviously somewhat of a hostile action, and it might upset the faction you are robbing them from. This is strong enough to work on those with an unwaveringly loyal tag too. No more amazing colonists that refuse to join you. Next then, studies that need the disruptor flares research to have been unlocked. So let's go with Metal Horror Symbiosis, granting you access to the Metal Horror Symbiote for just 50 Bioferrite and 1 Shard. This grants the host a reduction to standard incoming damage of 75%, as well as boosting melee damage factor to 125, at the cost of increasing weakness to burns and fire to 133%. Now, yes, of course, this goes on our melee powerhouse, who is now stacking strong damage, the Hulkification, the Strength Enhancer, and the Metal Horror, pushing them up to 352% melee damage. Moving on to Dreadheart Regeneration, which unlocks the Dreadheart Implant. This costs 10 Bioferrite, 2 Shards and 1 Dreadmeld Core, a new item dropped by the Dreadmeld itself. This implant gives the colonist access to an incredibly powerful regeneration effect, which could heal 350 HP a day, but the effect itself only lasts for 1 hour, on a 3-hour cooldown. This regeneration effect fixes not only active wounds, but old scars and missing body parts too, twisting flesh as needed to restore the body to its perfect condition. It's not without risk though, as each use of this ability runs with the potential of causing the colonist to begin to violently sprout flesh beasts from their body, applying 100% pain so they're likely going to collapse from shock as monstrosities attack any nearby targets. It's a very powerful effect, but equally dangerous if you use it at an inopportune time. Make sure you've got support around to cover for this going tits up. Then we have the Psychic Agonizer. This needs 10 Bioferrite, 2 shards and 1 Nokia emitter. Another new item added with this mod, dropped by the Nokia when it's defeated. This gives the colonist a pretty straightforward AoE ability with a 5-day cooldown, the Agony Pulse. This applies 100% pain to all targets in range with an acute effect and then becoming a lingering debuff. For the majority of xenotypes, that amount of pain is enough to instantly drop them to the floor. Hussar and Neanderthal will continue to fight, but it's going to be a lot easier to bring them down with just a few additional wounds. You'll need to be careful with the colonist that has this installed, as any lingering pain that they experience, like discomfort from scars, will create a potential feedback loop that's painful for others around them, stacking a pain debuff on them the longer they stand next to the implanted colonist. Onto the Black Sight device, costing 10 Bioferrite, 2 shards and 3 Noctilith sensors. As you can guess, you're going to gather these new items by destroying Noctiliths. This gives the ability to apply the Black Sight buff, which, if used incorrectly, is actually a debuff. With a 6-hour duration and a 5-day cooldown, it can be a pretty beastly advantage if used during a fight, at night, or in a very dark environment. At its initial stage, Black Sight simply provides night vision, with the buff changing its balance of effects based on if the colonist is stood in light or dark. The longer you stand in either, the more potent the effects become for that side, progressing through moderate, serious, and then extreme buffs. Darkness will progressively improve move speed, up to 200%, reduce melee cooldown, down to just 33% at its peak impact, and lower pain by 15%. If exposed to light, these buffs become debuffs, causing 15% pain, doubling melee cooldown, and halving move speed at its most extreme level. It's perfect if you're living in a colony full of dirt moles to begin with, as these will provide reliable, long-lasting and chunky buffs to your melee line fighting in pitch darkness. Another tech needed for this one, Deadlife Dust will grant you access to the Deadlife Coil Study. Now you've got an implant of the same name, costing just 50 Bioferrite and 1 shard to make. Now this is a bit of an interesting one, weirdly giving you some more options to pair alongside things like implanted IEDs or the brain detonator. Any colonist with this installed, once killed, will come back as a greater shambler. Now you're not going to have control over them and the corpse will be instantly rotten, so it does make it basically ruined for any real resurrection options. These great shamblers have far better stats when compared to a normal zombie. They share the same 0 pain, 70% consciousness, min-max temperature tolerances, toxic resist and a psychic immunity, with the greater shambler then having 100 HP of regeneration a day, a higher containment strength requirement, a 50% melee cooldown instead of the increased cooldown on a normal shambler, 200% move speed, halved incoming damage and 150% melee damage. Even more interestingly, whilst you don't have direct control over the goopy mess, they are still friendly towards you. You'll just struggle to wrangle them to stand in the right area and act as a defensive measure at times.
Player 2 has entered the game.
Ed!
Finally, we've got Advanced Ghoul Enhancements. For those of you that enjoy making good use of the undead meat shields, you'll get 6 shiny new toys to play with from this, starting with the Deadlife Venom Claw, costing only 50 Bioferrite and 5 standard components. These heavy claws lower movement by 10% for each one installed, with you likely wanting a pair to ensure that its attacks are prioritised. They also have a part efficiency of 80%, lowering manipulation, which will, in turn, hamper some melee stats. With 33% armor penetration and a pretty standard 2-second swing, this hits for around 22 damage, normally split over 2 wounds. The real bonus here is the Deadlife Venom that they inflict upon their target, which causes any creature or humanoid killed whilst under its effect to reanimate as a shambler, which is friendly to your faction. This allows you to very easily bolster your own meat shield with some fodder, with any shamblers killed then going on to inflict lung rot on attackers that stand in the line too long whilst waiting to attack. It's a beautifully macabre combo. Next is the Bioferrite Extractor. This needs 40 Bioferrite and 4 advanced components to create, hitting the goal with a 0.4 move speed penalty and increasing its hunger rate to 125%, for the upside of producing a single Bioferrite a day. Now, it might just be me, but this isn't what I prioritise with my goals normally. I'd rather have a combat optimal Ghoul instead of one slowly producing resources, because if I wanted a Ghoul making bioferrite for me, I'd have them in a containment cell with a harvester hooked up to them. On to Ghoul power plating, requiring a whopping 120 bioferrite, 6 advanced components and 50 uranium. As well as looking absolutely sick, giving the Ghoul a very Fallout Raider looking appearance, this provides 50 blunt and 80 sharp armour, and halves incoming damage, at the pretty hefty cost of a 0.8 move speed penalty, like cataphract gear for Ghouls. This is an exclusive implant. It can't be paired alongside normal Ghoul plating, as hilarious as that level of damage reduction would be, and you'll also need to consider carefully when installing this, as I can't currently see a way to remove it outside of using dev mode, so once it's on, it's there forever. The metabolic engine is next, costing a pretty straightforward 100 bioferrite and 8 standard components. This is going to make your Ghoul a hungry boy, cranking that hunger rate up to 150%. For this, you'll be able to offset some of the penalties normally inflicted to your Ghoul by other implants, with it reducing melee cooldown to 75% and providing an additional 1 move speed. If you want your Ghouls to be able to actually get into combat after you've thrown all kinds of weapons and armour on them, this is going to be almost necessary, so make sure you've got a good chunk of raw meat sitting in storage to stop your undead army turning a bit feral. Now we've got the Nerve Shredder claws, costing 50 bioferrite and 5 standard components, just like the Deadlife Venom option. They also share exactly the same debuffs and damage profile. The difference is that the toxins laced throughout these claws apply a stunning effect similar to using a nerve spiker. Whilst the target is able to adapt to the toxin after a few attacks, it refreshes relatively quickly, allowing you to get more stuns off throughout a combat cycle, unlike EMP, which typically sees an adaptation lasting until the fight is over. You could very easily have one of each claw, as the Deadlife Venom only needs to be applied once to work, and the stun is more useful throughout the fight. And finally, we have the Stalker Skull, costing 50 bioferrite, 3 advanced components and 25 uranium. This, like the power plating, cannot be removed once installed, with it being very clearly mentioned in the item description this time. Strangely, despite it saying that it protects the Ghoul's head, the implant itself provides no armour. It does however offer 0.2 melee dodge and hit chance, as well as a 20% sight buff, at the cost of a 0.2 move speed penalty, meaning the Stalker Skull and power armour will balance the move speed offset perfectly if paired with the metabolic engine. It also looks pretty damn cool, which is always an upside. And there we have it, integrated implants. Accurate at the time of recording and constantly being updated, so I fully expect this video to have the wrong numbers or be missing parts in just a matter of weeks. Looking at the patch notes, there have literally been 3 parts added after I've written this script and recorded it. Whilst this mod does add a lot of just bonkers powerful things to the game, it's also highly demanding on your stock of advanced components and plasteel, so you're going to need a very late game colony to be able to afford the majority of this. At which point, good luck making optimal builds across your entire group of colonists when you're probably going to be sitting on 12 to 20 of them. It can lean equally well into either giving everybody a little something special to make them stand apart, or dumping everything possible into a single god tier colonist that can wade into combat by themselves and return with barely a scratch, especially if you pair this with stuff like the Warlord path from Psycast Expanded. Overall, it's a damn fun mod with a hell of a lot of passion and polish going into it, which is really awesome to see. Normally on mods of this scale, you find that they're littered with typos, missing capital letters, strange hedifs, or straight up missing effects. But this isn't a project that's being rushed. It's very clearly being made, maintained, and patched by someone that is proud of the work they have done. Kudos to you, LTS. This stuff is top tier. Thanks for watching, folks. If you have any mods you'd like to see a full breakdown for, or suggestions of mods you'd like to see covered, feel free to leave them in the comments, I might get around to them. I'll be back again soon with another Rimworld mod rundown. Wherever you are in the world, enjoy the rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening. Take care.